there's something that always follows us. Whether we're happy or sad, successful or struggling, it's there. It's not a clear enemy, and not exactly a comforting friend either. It's a feeling deep, familiar, and sometimes terrifying. Fear. It can make us give up on our dreams before we even begin. It can hold us back, even when our heart is begging us to move forward. But here's the strange part. Fear doesn't always want to harm us. Sometimes it just wants to be seen. Today, I want to share a story with you about a young woman, like so many others, who once lived with constant worry and hesitation. Until one day, in a very unexpected way, she came face to face with her fear and had a conversation with it. A conversation that changed her life. If you've been carrying dreams you haven't dared to chase, if there are hopes in your heart you've never allowed yourself to touch, take a moment, sit with this story, because maybe this is your story too. And who knows, after hearing it, you might realize fear isn't something you need to run from anymore. She was a young woman, just like many others, carrying within her a dreamy heart and a deep longing to live a meaningful life. A life not just of survival, but of love, of creativity, of becoming fully, unapologetically herself. But there was something that always followed her like a shadow. Not a person, not a situation, but fear. It didn't scream, it didn't threaten, but quietly, it stood in her way at every turn. She feared failure, feared being judged, feared not being good enough, feared making mistakes, feared not being loved. And sometimes the fear was so vague, she couldn't even name it. She once stood before a big opportunity, an interview for her dream job. But the night before, fear whispered, "What if you're not good enough? What if they reject you? What if you fail?" And so she walked away, not because she lacked the ability, but because she believed what fear had said. She once dreamed of writing a book, of sharing her stories with the world. But every time her fingers hovered over the keyboard, that familiar voice returned. Who's even going to read this? What if no one cares? And so the page stayed blank, and the stories in her heart were never told. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't without dreams. She was just afraid. And the worst part was, she started to believe, I'm not enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, not brave enough to live the life she truly wanted. What she didn't know was this. Fear doesn't come to kill your dreams. It comes to ask you just one question. Do you have the courage to keep going, even while your hands are still shaking? But back then, she didn't know that. She thought that to live a brave life, she had to get rid of fear. She had to toughen up. She had to feel nothing when things fell apart. She didn't yet understand. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. Being brave means you take the next step, even if your heart is still trembling. And then, one day, she met someone. An older woman, calm, quiet, with eyes that had seen so much. That meeting, simple as it seemed, opened the door to a conversation that would change everything. A conversation that began with these words. Sometimes, the fears we run from are actually the doorway to real freedom. That afternoon, it was lightly raining. She stepped into an old coffee shop tucked quietly on a street corner. Not because she liked it there, but because she was running. Running from an interview she had spent weeks preparing for. But in the final moment, couldn't bring herself to walk through the door. Her hair was still damp from the rain. Her eyes empty. Her trembling hand stirred a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. And once again, the familiar questions echoed in her mind. Am I on the wrong path? Does anyone ever really get past this fear? A warm, gentle voice spoke from the table nearby. It was an older woman. Silver hair fell loosely by her ears. But her eyes, they shone with the quiet fire of someone who had weathered many storms. She spoke with a softness that cut straight through. What are you afraid of, my dear? The girl blinked. She hadn't said a word, but somehow the woman knew. At first, she said nothing. But in the presence of this stranger, she felt something rare, safe. And so, she began to speak about the opportunities she had let slip away, about her dream of writing, about wanting a life with no regrets, but how all of it had stayed locked inside her head, because fear always won. The woman nodded slowly, then said, "You know, Everyone is afraid, even the ones who seem the strongest. But the difference is this. Courageous people aren't fearless. They've just learned to talk with their fear, instead of running from it. She frowned. Talk with fear. The woman smiled gently. Yes, fear is not your enemy. It's a part of you. And if you truly want to grow, you don't fight it. You face it. You ask it, why are you here? What are you trying to protect inside me? And when you listen, really listen, you'll see that fear doesn't want to hurt you. It's just been shouting because it's scared too. She looked at the woman, as if for the very first time. She realized that fear hadn't come to pull her down, but to ask if she was ready to rise. Before leaving, the woman placed a small piece of paper into her hand. On it, a single line, "To be free, you must dare to look at what you fear the most." That evening, she didn't go home. She wandered in the rain for a long time, carrying in her heart a question she had never dared to ask. If I stop running, what might happen instead? What she didn't know was this. That single question was the beginning of a strange, quiet encounter with fear itself. Sometimes, the person who changes your life only needs to say one sentence at exactly the right moment. That night, the girl returned to her small room. Everything around her was the same. The white walls, the wooden desk, the old lamp flickering in the corner. But something had shifted. She couldn't tell if it was in the air or deep within herself. She took out the small piece of paper the old woman had given her, reading that single line over and over again. To be free, you must dare to look at what you fear the most. And for the first time, she didn't look away. She closed her eyes, took a long, deep breath, and whispered softly, "If fear were a living being, a real character, what would it look like?" Then something strange began to happen. In her mind, the world started to shift. The room around her faded, replaced by a vast, silent battlefield. And there, she saw herself, small and alone, standing face to face with a shadow emerging slowly from the dark. A tall, looming figure wrapped in thick fog. No face, but it radiated an energy so powerful, her heart pounded in her chest. It was fear. It didn't scream. It didn't charge. It wasn't angry. It just stood there, quiet and close. She took a step back. That familiar feeling rushed in. Racing heart, cold hands, shallow breath. But this time, she remembered the woman's words. Not to fight, but to understand. She took a shaky breath. Even though her body trembled, she raised her head, and slowly, she stepped forward. She bowed her head 3 times and said, "I ask permission to speak with you." Something unexpected happened. The shadow bowed back, and a deep voice echoed, not threatening but calm. "Thank you for treating me with such respect." She choked up. I want to know, how do I stop you from controlling me?" Fear responded, "I have 2 weapons. First, I speak very fast, so your mind can't catch up. Second, I come very close, so you lose your calm. And when you're overwhelmed, you begin to obey everything I say." She held her breath, listening closely. "But if you don't obey, if you just listen with clarity and respect, then I have no power over you." She stood there, frozen. It felt like every wall inside her had just crumbled. So that was it. Fear wasn't the enemy. It only became powerful when she reacted to it unconsciously. But if she chose to listen without surrendering, fear could no longer control her. That night, for the first time in her life, she spoke to fear as if it were an old friend, one she had misunderstood for years, but was finally ready to understand. And that moment was the very first step out of the invisible cage she had unknowingly built around herself. Fear doesn't disappear, but when you sit down with it, you no longer have to be swallowed whole. After that strange conversation with fear, nothing in her life magically changed overnight, but something had begun to shift. The mornings weren't so heavy anymore. The self-blame, the exhaustion, the fog started to lift. She woke up a little earlier, sat in front of the mirror a little longer, and looked herself in the eyes, as if to say, "I won't run anymore." Fear was still there. Of course it was. But now, it wasn't some towering shadow swallowing every thought. It was more like a visitor, knocking gently from time to time, reminding her she was about to do something new, something brave, something just outside her comfort zone. She began trying again, one thing at a time. All the dreams she'd once abandoned because of fear. She reopened the draft of her first book, but this time, instead of writing to impress, she wrote to tell the truth, with the rhythm of her own heartbeat guiding every word. And when fear whispered, "Who's going to care?" she smiled and answered, "Maybe no one, but I care." She sent out job applications, not just one, but many. And when she sat waiting for interviews, heart pounding, palms sweating, she straightened her back and whispered under her breath, "Hello again, fear. I see you. Thanks for reminding me. I'm growing." There was no instant miracle, but day by day, she found herself stronger, braver, and freer. She started sharing her journey online, not to impress anyone, but simply to be honest. And to her surprise, messages began to trickle in, quiet, sincere thank yous, from strangers who said, "I feel this too." And she realized, when we dare to tell our story, even while trembling, we not only begin to heal ourselves, we open a door for others to find themselves too. Each time fear returned, she no longer panicked. She paused, she listened, and she chose not to obey, especially when fear was just echoing an old habit. Slowly, she stopped being controlled by fear and started directing her own life. One day, as she walked out of a big interview, someone asked her, "How did you overcome fear?" She simply smiled and said, "I didn't overcome it. I just learned to walk with it and keep moving anyway." Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is action, even when your heart is still shaking. The girl who once curled up in the dark, who once ran from interviews, who once buried her face in half-finished pages of a forgotten book, is still her. But now, she is a braver, more honest version of herself. She didn't become a superhero. She didn't stand on grand stages or achieve things that made the world applaud. But she did something she once believed was impossible. She chose to live without letting fear lead the way. She learned that fear never really disappears. It's a part of being human, like a shadow, always there beside us. But now, whenever fear shows up, she no longer tries to push it away or overpower it. She simply looks in the eye, smiles, and says, "Thank you, but today, I'm doing it anyway." Because she had discovered a quiet truth. Only when we face our fears can we move toward freedom. Only when we stop fighting it and start listening with clarity can we truly take back the reins of our life. Throughout her journey, she never defeated fear, but with patience, understanding, and deep respect for herself, she stripped fear of the power it once held. And from that moment on, beautiful things began to bloom. She finished her first book, not to be famous, but to share her truth. She took the job she used to only dream about, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she learned to accept the fear and still move forward. She became a friend, a sister, a quiet source of strength for those still wandering through the shadows she once knew so well. And if you, listening to this story, are carrying a fear in your heart, please remember this. You are not alone, and you don't need to overcome your fear to begin. You just need to take one small step with it beside you, because this life doesn't require you to be flawless or invisible. Life only asks that you show up with both your trembling and your light. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's believing something is worth doing, even when the fear is still there. Maybe right now, you're sitting in a quiet room or curled up under a blanket on a night filled with worry. Maybe you just failed an interview. Maybe you just set aside a dream that hasn't come true. Or maybe you're simply afraid. Afraid you're not enough. Afraid you don't belong. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid no one will ever understand what's tearing you up inside. If that's you, pause, breathe, and listen closely to these words. You're not wrong for being afraid. You're not weak because you feel fear. You're just being real. And that's the mark of a heart that still knows how to feel. But also, remember this. Fear is not the end. It's simply the first doorway to becoming who you're meant to be. No one walks a meaningful path without trembling. No one reaches a dream without doubting themselves. The truth is, fear always walks beside the things that matter. It shows up when you try to speak your truth, when you dare to try something new, when you're on the edge of living as yourself, instead of living to meet someone else's expectations. You know what? The only thing that makes fear dangerous is believing you have to obey it. But you don't. Starting today, try this. Listen to fear without following it. Greet it, but keep moving anyway. And every time you do, even in the smallest way, you teach yourself a new truth. I can be afraid and still take action. I can tremble and still move forward. You don't need to become someone stronger. You just need to become more honest with yourself. The story of the girl you heard today is not meant to impress you. It's here to remind you, if she could do it, so can you. On the other side of fear is the life you were meant to live. Don't stay outside forever. Step in and start living. In the end, the most important thing she learned wasn't how to eliminate fear. It was how to live with it, calmly, steadily, and without letting it define her. She didn't have to be braver than everyone else. She just needed enough courage to stop turning away for what she truly wanted. And so, with small, shaky but determined steps, she began to walk out of her darkness. Her story might just be your story too. If you're carrying a fear about the future, about yourself, or about never being enough, please remember this. Fear is not the end of your story. It's just a doorway. And all it asks is that you're brave enough to open it. You don't need to defeat fear. You just need to stop letting it make your choices. Because sometimes, just behind the thing that scares you most is the life you've always dreamed of. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward, even when fear is still there. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it touched something inside you. Some part that's been waiting to be trusted, to be freed. Start small. One honest action today, and you'll begin to see you're not weak for feeling afraid. You're strong because you keep walking anyway.